Welcome back, everyone. My name is Henrik Hintze, and I'm a capital goods analyst here at ABG. With me today, I have Jonas Inga, CEO of Gapwaves. Welcome, Jonas.
Thank you. Thank you, Henrik. First and foremost, thank you for inviting Gapwaves and me to have the opportunity to talk about Gapwaves. I'll give you an overview of the company and the technology, but also the application areas that are of most interest to us right now. And I'm relatively new in the company as CEO since late August, but I have been engaged with the company for almost 4 years now as its chairman of the board. So it doesn't want to work. I'll try this one instead. Okay, so within the market space that we're active, it's primarily driving automation. And when saying driving automation, don't think just about personal cars, the ones that you drive to work or to the shop every day, but also other moving vehicles. And I'll explain this a bit more later in the presentation. Gapwaves can also contribute in other areas such as smart cities. In smart cities, which is a very wide nomination or description, there's a need for sensors, radar sensors that can detect or measure traffic or presence of humans to regulate, for instance, energy consumption or lighting in a city environment. And then, of course, connectivity and telecom and satellite communication. That's also an area where Gapwaves' unique antenna technology can contribute. And I'll touch briefly on these areas, but focus mostly on the area of driving automation in this presentation. In driving automation, radar technology is being used to help the driver. Of course, to create a better car, but primarily to help the driver. So today it's about driver assistance systems. We're not there yet with automatic vehicles that you just step into and the car drives itself from start to stop. But in driver assistance, these technology can help the driver to be a better driver. It's not taking over the role of the driver. For instance, detecting dangerous situations or doing emergency braking or helping when you change lanes. All of these technologies, I think most of you have experience in the cars that you have today. But there's a bigger underlying reason for this development, and here's one example in safety. And these numbers, 600,000 deaths, more than 600,000 deaths per year from people that are not drivers. They are on the side of the road or nearby the road, and they are unprotected. But these systems can help the driver react much faster and in a better way to avoid these. And for the society, of course, this is a big cost and a big improvement that can be had. So don't just think about drivers and regular cars when I talk about this. It's also about the other stakeholders that are nearby the traffic. So the safety aspect is one, but we also have other things that are talking or driving the marketplace for Gapwaves. It's regulatory, legal, and technical. For instance, in the technical aspect, frequency bands are being allocated, and you're not allowed to use other frequencies, so you don't have unwanted traffic in certain frequency ranges. And there's been a shift from lower frequencies to higher frequencies in automotive radar. So now they can only use what we call the 77 gigahertz band. And this is very important because Gapwaves technology performs better and delivers better performance at higher frequencies. And now the automotive industry cannot use the lower frequencies anymore. In terms of safety rating, Euro NCAP is one example. There's others also. It's not possible for a car manufacturer to get the highest safety ratings of cars without these driver assistance systems anymore. As a legal example, AEB, automatic emergency braking, that's a requirement in the EU market and now also in the US, that all cars that are being sold have to have these systems. And they are based on sensors and radar sensors. Not only radar sensors, but there's also other sensors, which I will explain. And I want to highlight this because these are fundamental market drivers in this field that creates a very good situation for Gapwaves and the application of our technology. So in automotive, of course, we have end users. That's us, buyers and users of cars. We want better vehicles that can help more in difficult situations. And of course, ultimately, I guess we want a better lifestyle. We have to commute to work at least a few days a week. And obviously, if there's like in Gothenburg this morning, we had snow, a few centimeters only. But still, it took an hour to get to the office instead of the normal 30 minutes. And it was due to a queue. These technologies, the driver assistance systems, can help you to will allow you to focus on other things while you're in a traffic jam or traffic queue, for instance. I'm sure some of you have already tried that in your current cars. The industry that supply the car manufacturers with these radar sensors and systems, obviously they need better performance for these sensors. The sensors need to be able to look longer, to see more in detail, and also be very compact in size because they need to be fit into the car, like inside the bumper. There needs to be a number of them, and the space constraint is quite significant. And of course, being automotive, it's always about cost, because they need a number of these sensors, and there's a lot of other things needed in the car. And the car manufacturer really dictates the pricing of the car. So there's always a very strong cost pressure. And Gapwaves can deliver in these areas with our unique and patented technology. As one example, Volvo EX90, I'm sure you've seen some of it on the news. If you look more in depth into it, it's being positioned as a new type of safety level for cars and a new driver experience, state of the art, launched just a few weeks ago. The EX90 has a number of sensors. It has one LiDAR, which is a very advanced camera type of sensor. It has 5 radar sensors in it, and 8 cameras and 16 ultrasonic sensors. And each radar, because that's where we're active, needs each an antenna. So that's 5 Gapwaves and antennas if the manufacturer is using a system from that is based on our antenna technology. And as the market moves to more and more automation in the vehicles, more and more sensors are needed. I've highlighted a number of radars. Currently, I would say that the industry is at level 2. So on average, per car, 3 to 5 radar sensors. That's 3 to 5 antennas. And currently, there's probably 80 to 90 million cars being produced in the world annually. And obviously, it's a lot of radar sensors that are being put into cars already. But as the field moves forward, or to the right here in the picture, towards higher levels of automation, the number of sensors needed increase. So I would say that the Volvo EX90, which I showed in the previous slide, is probably at level 3. It has the hardware to allow for level 3, which means that under certain conditions, like on a freeway, below a certain speed, you're allowed to let go of the steering wheel and not look at the road. You can bring up your tablet or phone or do messages or emails, etc., under certain conditions. It also requires that the authorities approve of this. But in Germany, they have approved this on the freeways. And there is a car from Mercedes that has this capability also. But the entire field is moving in this direction. So it's a huge growth area for us at Gapwaves, because the need for radar sensors is growing. And it's growing quite quickly. 27% a year from current around 50 million radar sensors going into cars, growing at close to 30% per year, up to 240 million expected in 2027. So, and of course, this is a very promising growth area for Gapwaves. And on the right, you see some of the companies that supply these systems, and some of them we've been able to communicate as our customers also. So our solution, and why is it key? Well, a radar will not work out without an antenna. Every radar sensor requires an antenna. And that's why the antenna and the performance of the antenna is really key in this development. When Gapwaves was started 2011, obviously there was a lot of discussions around 5G and telecom. And that is still an opportunity to be had. But the industry, the telecom industry, they've been able to launch 5G and to handle the required bandwidth and the amount of connected devices without changing their frequency bands. So they've been able to upgrade the existing networks. However, in the future, they will have to utilize higher frequency bands. And when they do, they will need new antenna technology. So for Gapwaves, it's still a future opportunity for us, which is quite significant. But it all comes down to the frequency bands. If they are not using frequency bands at 30 gigahertz or higher, we don't really add that much of a benefit compared to the current antenna technology. And of course, you've already seen the news of 6G and even higher frequency areas, which is obviously another potential opportunity for Gapwaves. On the right, you see some of these antenna examples. The top right picture shows a corner radar. There's 4 to 5 in each car. Under the bumper, typically, and one in the front, the grille of the car. On the lower right, it's a higher resolution type of radar. It's 10 by 10 centimeters in size. Typically, it's placed in the front of the car. It can look much further ahead with much greater detail. And with our technology, we can build these antennas in 3D construction or 3D layers. So they can be very easy to assemble. We're using cheap materials, plastics with a metal coating, and obviously they are very easy to assemble. All of these factors are very important for the automotive industry because it keeps the cost down, so it can easily be scaled up in huge production volumes. Inside the antenna, we have a patented way, that's the invention really, where there is like a magnetic field that guides the signal through the antenna. And like I mentioned, we have a number of patents around this. In a business perspective, we have the tier ones. That's the big suppliers to the automotive industry. OEMs, that's the producers of the cars. But on the lower part, you can see the Gapwave business. Typically, we're being approached by the radar suppliers to the car industry. And they have a set of performance specifications that need to be met. We develop this antenna prototypes for them. We typically get paid to do that. And then obviously if the antenna performs, they sign a contract with us either for licensing or for us to supply that to the manufacturers. They supply the car manufacturer who launched the car into the market. And then typically it's a pretty long cycle. A car has maybe a lifespan of 6 to 10, or in some cases even more than 10 years. But during that period, the system is not being changed. You don't change the components in an existing car. So obviously there's a big aftermarket for the supplier, and then it starts over with a new radar generation, new car generation, etc. So it's a very strong business once you get into it with your products. We have licensed our technology to some of the leading car suppliers, Veoneer in 2019. That's a license agreement. Hella, and nowadays it's called Forvia, or part of Forvia, in 2021. Also a license agreement. However, we use a production partner of Gapwaves to produce these. So we are also active in the production of the antennas, which is a difference versus Veoneer. And Smart Micro is actually a smart city type of radar sensor, so it's being used to monitor traffic. And this summer we were able to announce a partnership with Bosch, where we developed a very high resolution radar. It's called imaging radar, so it will provide the same relevant information as a camera will do, but not all the unnecessary information that the camera provides. And with Bosch, we're developing a new type of radar sensor. We developed the antenna part of that. And then we're also nominated as the supplier for Bosch in very high volumes during a number of years to come once they launch the product. And when we talk about production, it doesn't mean that organically we have to produce millions of antenna in our facility. However, we have production capability today of maybe 100 to 150,000 antennas a year in our facility. But we work with different partners, and we can use partners to produce antennas in larger volumes. But we want to be the supplier. We want to have the relationship with the car industry and negotiate the contracts and pricing, and not just be a license provider and technology provider. We see other opportunities. I mentioned it in the beginning of the presentation that there's other segments in the market, for instance, smart cities, but also in terms of vehicles. There's trucks, there's autonomous trucks, there's loading trucks in harbors, there's airport vehicles. All of these vehicles, to automate them, they need to have perception of their surroundings, and that requires radar systems. So we have other segments that are not as big in volume, but have very interesting price points for these systems. Just wanted to show a quick illustration of one of our production units in our facility. This is a testing robot. It cycles through one antenna every 5 seconds. So we have quite a bit of capacity. This is a product that we have developed, and we sell also these equipments to our production partners. So briefly, Gapwaves, I mentioned that already, founded in 2011 by a professor at Chalmers University in Gothenburg, Technical University in Gothenburg. And we were listed on Nasdaq First North in 2016. We have become a standard solution for these types of waveguide antennas that we're involved with. And we've already been able to communicate 3 of these major partnerships with leading car industry suppliers. We have a good patent situation with close to 40 patents on our technology, and we're also exploring patenting the production of the antennas, and also the testing and calibration of the antennas. So it's not only around the technical innovation as such. And obviously, as I mentioned, we have a technology that is very well suited for high volume manufacturing. So it's really geared well for the car industry. And just to finish off here, those of you who have followed Gapwaves through the years have seen pretty interesting development in the last few years, with significant growth and stepwise, of course, but this is also related to the contracts that we've entered. Like I mentioned, this summer, a major agreement with Bosch, and of course that is in development phase right now, but will come into a delivery phase in a few years' time. But also this year we've seen strong development. So just the first three quarters we're already at 53 million and 105% growth versus last year same period. And Q3 was also the first profitable quarter for Gapwaves, which is a milestone, 6.3 million in EBITDA. And for those of you who follow us, you know that we have a strong cash position, 178 million right now. So it looks very positive right now. But the sales, the cycles in the automotive industry are strong. But once you're in there with your products, you can be relatively secured in a long-term supplier situation and to be able to supply products during many years. Yes, that was the short overview and update on Gapwaves. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jonas. Let's move on to some questions. So, speaking of your technology, what technologies do your competitors use and how do they differ from yours?
We are involved with what is called waveguide antennas. So think of it like a metal box which guides the signal. We have a special version, as I mentioned in the presentation, of the waveguide where the metal walls are not being used. Instead, we create a magnetic field that guides the signal in the tube. So we're not so reliant on having a perfect metal tube, which means relaxed or not so hard mechanical requirements when you assemble it. We can make it thinner, and we can also use cheaper material than the competitors. So there's different type of competitors. One is traditional antennas, and they have too much losses in higher frequencies, so they cannot perform on the same level. But we also distinguish ourselves versus other manufacturer of waveguide antennas, these metal tubes, because we're not using the metal tube as such. We create a magnetic tube instead, and that's the invention by the professor from which the company was started. And I say it again that our method allows easier and more cost-effective production. So because it doesn't need to be that precise.
Interesting. At the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned this frequency regulation change, which kind of cemented the need for higher frequency antennas. Why was this change made, and could there be additional changes in the future which puts your technology to its limits?
Not in terms of higher frequencies. I think we're very far away from having technical limitations on high frequencies using waveguide technology. I guess the main reason for assigning new frequency bands is that it becomes too crowded in the existing ones. As you bring in more devices or more connectivity, etc., then you need more bandwidth. And higher frequencies can also transmit more data than lower frequencies. So it works the same as the telecom industry. But it's very strict that you're not allowed, you will not get your products approved unless you stick to the assigned frequency bands. So it's a very hard technical requirement.
All right. You mentioned the 5G market as a potential future additional market beyond automotive. Do you see any other markets which could become relevant in the future?
Other than 5G?
And the automotive, which you talked about.
Yeah, I mentioned also smart cities. And if we move outside of traditional automotive, there's everything else that moves. It doesn't even have to be on the road. It can be flying on top of the road. All of these things need to perceive the surroundings. I mean, there's sidewalks, there's crossings, there's light poles, etc. And even if it's just a stupid delivery box, which is automatic, it still needs to perceive these things, otherwise it will bump into them. So all of these areas are interesting when it comes to radar sensors, compact and cost-effective radar sensors. And they need an antenna technology to go with it.
All right. Finally, where do you see the company in 5 years, and what are the biggest challenges in getting there?
I think in 5 years, with the current agreements that we will have Gapwaves antennas in cars and other things moving around in our society. And Gapwave will be a large-scale supplier to automotive industry. I'm pretty sure that we'll have some more things moving on the telecom side as well. But also these other things that will move around in society. I'm sure you all follow what Einride and other players in the US and China are doing with robotaxis and automated transports and people transports, etc. I'm pretty sure we'll see applications and Gapwaves in those areas also.
Thank you very much for that, Jonas. That's all we have time for. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.